Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today we're examining a case involving a college apartment, a mysterious handwritten note, and questions that haunted investigators for nearly a decade.
Yeah, and it's really a remarkable convergence of forensic reality and, public perception.
Definitely.
We kind of always assume that physical evidence serves as this definitive anchor, right? But in this scenario, the sheer volume of clues acted more like an archaeological dig where artifacts from entirely different centuries are just found in the exact same layer of dirt.
Right, the evidence just did not tell a single linear story at all.
Exactly. It contradicted itself.
And I am continually struck by the geography of that specific crime scene because it really sets the stage for everything that follows.
Oh, geography is everything here.
It really is. We are looking at Hawthorne at the View. This is a sprawling apartment complex sitting squarely on the border between Chapel Hill and Durham in North Carolina.
Classic student housing setup.
Yeah, exactly. And if you walk into one of these units, particularly on the morning of September 7, 2012, you're met with a scene that completely defies that casual, transitional nature of college living.
Right. It's jarring.
You have profound violence, blood spatter across the walls, a victim partially wrapped in a comforter. Yet resting right in the center of that visceral reality is this wildly theatrical artifact.
The note.
The note, a handwritten note on a fast food takeout bag.
And the jarring juxtaposition of those elements immediately complicates the investigative narrative for police. I mean, a blunt force trauma scene is typically characterized by chaos, right? Impulsive action.
Totally chaotic.
But a written message requires a cognitive pause. It implies, intent or a desire to communicate.
Or maybe a calculated effort to misdirect.
Exactly. The presence of that fast food bag transforms the physical space from just a mere crime scene into this elaborate psychological puzzle.
Which is really the central axis of our entire discussion today. Because when you have a crime scene practically overflowing with physical evidence, a handwritten note, an abandoned weapon, and an unknown male DNA profile, how does it still result in nearly a decade of mystery and relentless internet speculation?
Well, that vacuum forces us to confront the limitations of forensic science in isolation. I mean, DNA, no matter how perfectly preserved it is, cannot generate a suspect out of thin air.
Right, you need a name to match it to.
Exactly. It requires a corresponding database entry, and when that entry does not exist, the investigation just stalls. And that's when the human tendency to impose narrative structure onto chaos really takes over.
Nature abhors a vacuum.
Precisely. The public begins to weave whatever circumstantial clues are available into a cohesive, often highly personalized story.
And to understand why the public became so deeply invested in those stories, we really have to look closely at the person whose life was taken.
She was a remarkable person.
She really was. Faith Hedgepeth was not some passive figure in this tragedy. She was a remarkably driven 19-year-old with a fiercely bright trajectory.
Just so much potential.
She was a student at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and beyond that, she was a Gates Millennium Scholar.
Which, that is not an easy thing to get.
No, not at all. That scholarship is not merely a financial award. It is an incredibly rigorous selection process that identifies students who possess exceptional academic records and a proven, tangible commitment to community leadership.
The statistics surrounding that scholarship are just staggering. I mean, the selection committee evaluates thousands of highly qualified applicants. They're looking for individuals who demonstrate not just intellectual capacity, but a resilient, forward-looking vision for their communities.
Right.
Winning that award signifies that a student has been recognized at a national level as a future leader.
And her leadership was inherently tied to her heritage. Faith was a deeply active, proud member of the Hollywood-Saponi tribe.
Which is a tight-knit community.
Very. For those unfamiliar with the geography of indigenous communities in North Carolina, the tribe is primarily based in Halifax and Warren counties, which is actually where the name Hollywood originates.
Oh, wow. I hadn't made that connection.
Yeah. And when you read the statements from her family and her tribal community, her ambition was consistently directed back toward them. She wanted to become a pediatrician.
Right, to serve the community.
Exactly. The goal was to acquire a world-class education at UNC and then return to serve her people.
That detailed context is crucial because it really amplifies the psychological impact of the crime. Public reaction to a murder is often proportional to the perceived destruction of potential.
That makes total sense.
And Faith represented a vital link between her tribe's history and its future. The violent severance of that link creates a profound sense of communal and societal loss.
Which in turn fuels the urgency and the intensity of the public's desire for answers. So let's trace the mechanics of that final evening, moving from September 6th into the early hours of September 7, 2012. Because the timeline systematically dismantles the illusion of safety that surrounds university life.
It's a very unsettling timeline.
It begins in an entirely recognizable academic setting. Faith and her roommate, Karina Rosario, are at Davis Library on the UNC campus. They are studying until roughly 11:30 p.m.
Pretty standard college Thursday night so far.
Yeah. And Davis Library is the massive, brutalist structure at the heart of campus. It's an environment built entirely around security and academic pursuit.
It is the quintessential safe zone.
Yeah.
And the transition from the library to the social sphere is, a standard rhythm of university life. But it also marks a shift from a controlled environment to a highly unpredictable one.
Right. They leave the library and eventually arrive at a nightclub on Franklin Street called The Thrill at 12:40 a.m.
Which is a completely different world from the library.
Oh, completely. Franklin Street on a Thursday night is a sensory overload. It is crowded, loud, and transient. And here, the first significant anomaly in the timeline occurs. Faith is seen interacting with an unidentified male outside the club.
Right, the mystery man.
Yes, and despite the public setting and the presence of witnesses, this individual's identity eluded law enforcement entirely.
Which really highlights the fallibility of human memory and eyewitness testimony. When traditional investigative avenues fail, like interviewing clubgoers or reviewing immediate security footage, law enforcement is forced to rely on more esoteric forensic applications.
Like Parabon.
Exactly. This is where the utilization of Parabon snapshot DNA phenotyping comes into play.
I was actually reviewing the methodology behind Parabon snapshot, and the underlying biological mechanics are fascinating. Instead of looking at the entire genome or relying on standard short tandem repeats like they use in a system like CODIS, phenotyping zeroes in on specific genetic markers called single nucleotide polymorphism.
Right, the SNPs.
Yeah, SNPs. It essentially reads the microscopic variations in a suspect's DNA to predict physical traits.
That is a very accurate assessment of the mechanism. The algorithms used by Parabon do not generate a literal photograph, They calculate the statistical probability of specific phenotypic expressions.
So it's mostly math.
It's entirely math. By analyzing these SNPs, the software predicts the level of melanin production, which dictates eye color, hair color, and skin tone. It also assesses genetic ancestry markers to predict cranial morphology.
Like the shape of the face.
Yeah, exactly, like the width of the jaw or the prominence of the cheekbones. The resulting composite is a mathematical projection of the suspect's genetic code.
Yet even with that advanced mathematical projection disseminated to the public, the man at the club remained nameless.
It adds an almost ghostly quality to the narrative.
It really does. The timeline then moves away from the club. At 2 a.m., Karina indicates she is feeling unwell, prompting them to leave the crowded public space of Franklin Street and return to the private sphere of the Hawthorne at the View apartment.
Which should theoretically represent a return to safety. However, the sequence of events over the next 2 hours completely subverts that expectation.
Definitely. At 3:40 a.m., an exceptionally strange digital artifact is created. A text message is sent from Faith's phone to Karina's former boyfriend.
This is where things get really bizarre.
Yeah, the syntax of the message is what investigators immediately flagged. It reads, quote, "Hey B, can you go over here, please? Rosario needs you," end quote.
Analyzing the linguistics of that text reveals several red flags. The use of the third person referring to her roommate by her last name, Rosario, is an incredibly unusual choice for an intimate, urgent communication between friends.
It sounds so formal.
Right. Forensic linguists examine these subtle deviations in syntax and vocabulary to determine authorship. They ask, is this Faith's natural texting cadence? Or is someone else operating the device attempting to simulate her voice while lacking the nuanced understanding of how she actually talks?
That linguistic anomaly introduces the concept of the lure text.
Yeah.
Because if we hypothesize that an unknown third party composed that message, the apartment is no longer a passive location. It has become an active trap.
Exactly.
The sender is attempting to manipulate the physical movements of individuals outside the apartment.
And the strategic intent behind a lure text is multifaceted. It could be an attempt to frame the recipient by placing them at the scene of the crime, or it could just be a method of verifying whether anyone is expected to arrive soon.
Oh, like checking if the coast is clear.
Precisely, establishing a timeline for the perpetrator to safely exit before someone walks in.
Wow. And less than an hour after that text is sent, the physical security of the apartment is completely compromised. At 4:25 a.m., Karina leaves the apartment to stay at a different friend's house. She reports that Faith was asleep in her bed. But the critical architectural failure here is that the front door is left unlocked.
The unlocked door fundamentally alters the forensic parameters of this entire case.
It changes everything.
It really does. A locked door confines the suspect pool to individuals with a key or those who were explicitly invited inside. An unlocked door broadens the suspect pool to literally anyone with physical access to the exterior hallway.
The psychology of the shared apartment complex plays a massive role here, I think. It functions as this sort of transitional fortress for young adults. You are surrounded by peers, you're sharing amenities, and you're operating under a collective assumption of security.
A false assumption, unfortunately.
Exactly. Leaving a door unlocked is often viewed as just a casual convenience for a returning roommate, rather than a critical lapse in personal safety. But that convenience masks the stark reality the building is, structurally, just a porous barrier exposed to the random chaos of the outside world.
That transitional fortress concept perfectly captures the cognitive dissonance happening there. Residents perceive the entire complex as an extension of their private living space. But an unlocked door in a communal hallway is just an open invitation to opportunism.
Anyone could walk by.
Right. It transforms the space from a secure domicile into an accessible theater for a totally random encounter.
And that encounter is realized at 11 a.m. when Karina returns to the apartment with a friend. The scene they discover is horrific. Faith has suffered fatal blunt force trauma. And the weapon used to inflict this trauma is resting right out in the open. It's an empty, thick glass Bacardi rum bottle.
And the choice of weapon is a critical behavioral indicator. An empty rum bottle is a weapon of convenience.
Meaning they didn't bring it with them.
Exactly. It heavily suggests that the perpetrator did not arrive at the apartment armed with the premeditated intent to commit murder.
That distinction really changes how we view the timeline. If the attacker brings a specialized weapon, you assume a predatory planned assault. Grabbing a bottle off a counter suggests the sudden, chaotic escalation. The violence was localized and reactionary.
It implies a rapid destabilization of the situation. The perpetrator utilized the immediate environment to execute the attack, which often correlates with a disorganized crime scene and an emotionally volatile offender.
But the theory of a disorganized, impulsive offender violently clashes with the evidence resting on the bed.
The note.
Written on a fast food bag are the words, "I'm not stupid, expletive, jealous."
It's so bizarre.
It is. And the handwriting analysts examine it, and it does not match Faith, it does not match Karina, and it does not match any immediate persons of interest.
The note is the defining anomaly of the Hawthorne at the View crime scene, because it introduces a highly specific emotional motive into a scene that otherwise suggests random, opportunistic violence.
Jealousy is such an intimate emotion.
Exactly. It requires a pre-existing relationship and a perceived betrayal. The author of that note is explicitly claiming that the violence was a consequence of an interpersonal grievance.
Furthermore, the forensic team recovers a complete, unknown male DNA profile from the scene. We have the genetic blueprint of the perpetrator, the suspected murder weapon, and a handwritten declaration of motive.
It sounds like an open and shut case.
Right. And yet the case immediately stalls. The DNA profile is uploaded to the combined DNA index system CODIS, and it generates 0 hits.
The mechanics of CODIS are often completely misunderstood by the public, mostly due to the expedited timelines portrayed in media and television.
Like CSI.
Right, where they get a match in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
A DNA profile is essentially a highly complex barcode. If that barcode has never been scanned into the national or state registry through a prior qualifying criminal conviction or arrest, the system just cannot identify the individual.
It's a dead end.
Exactly. The physical evidence is scientifically pristine, yet practically inert.
And that inert status persisted for 9 torturous years. The investigative silence was absolute until September 2021, when a procedural, seemingly mundane event triggered a massive breakthrough. An individual named Miguel Enrique Salguero Olivares was arrested for a routine driving under the influence charge in a neighboring jurisdiction.
And the bureaucratic process following a DUI arrest is what ultimately bridged the 9-year gap. Well, when an individual is processed for a qualifying offense, a biological sample is collected, often via just a simple buccal swab inside the cheek. That sample is then subjected to extraction and amplification processes at a state crime lab before the resulting profile is uploaded to CODIS.
I find the systemic friction involved in that process fascinating. It is not instantaneous at all.
Not even close.
State crime labs frequently operate with significant backlogs. The swab has to be physically transported, chemically processed, and then digitally uploaded. So when Salguero Olivares' profile finally hit the database, the algorithmic comparison triggered an alert connecting his genetic markers to the evidence preserved from the Hawthorne apartment.
And the identification of Salguero Olivares shattered every single preconceived notion held by the public and investigators.
He wasn't the guy from the club.
No, he was not the mystery man identified by Parabon Snapshot. He had no established relationship with Faith Hedgepeth. He was simply an individual who resided in the broader geographic area.
The randomness of his identity brings us to the psychological aftermath of the initial investigation. Because for 9 years, the absence of a CODIS hit created a massive information vacuum.
And the internet hates a vacuum.
Exactly. Law enforcement could not provide a suspect, so the internet mobilized to construct its own suspects. The true crime community anchored itself almost entirely to the assumption that the handwritten note was a genuine artifact of the killer's mind.
Which makes sense from a psychological standpoint. When faced with a lack of empirical data, human beings rely on narrative heuristics. We gravitate toward the most emotionally cohesive and logical story.
A jealous friend makes more narrative sense than a random intruder.
Exactly. The idea of a stranger walking through an unlocked door and committing a brutal murder is terrifying, precisely because it is governed by pure chance. It violates our inherent need for a predictable, orderly world.
So the internet rejected the possibility of randomness and instead built an intricate architecture of suspicion around Faith's inner circle. The roommate, Karina, and the ex-boyfriend became the focal points of thousands of hours of online scrutiny.
The 3:40 a.m. lore text and the word jealous on the fast food bag served as the foundational pillars for this sprawling theory of interpersonal betrayal.
And that theory was exponentially amplified by a piece of digital evidence that became a cultural phenomenon in its own right, the pocket dial voicemail.
Oh, the voicemail, that really changed everything online.
The voicemail is arguably one of the most debated pieces of audio in modern investigative history. At 1:23 a.m. on the night of the murder, a call was placed from Faith's phone to a friend's phone, resulting in a 3-minute recording.
And to an untrained ear listening to the raw file, it is just a dense, abrasive wall of static and muffled noise.
It sounds like a phone rubbing against the fabric of a pocket in a loud environment.
Exactly. However, the raw audio was subjected to extensive manipulation by independent online analysts, most notably an individual named Arlo West.
Right.
And this marks the intersection where civilian enthusiasm attempts to replicate specialized forensic science, often with highly controversial results.
I was reading about the techniques used by these civilian audio analysts, and it involves really aggressive equalization. They use digital audio workstations to strip away specific low-frequency ranges, like the bass of a nightclub, and heavily compress and amplify the frequencies typically associated with human speech.
Which fall roughly between 300 and 3,400 hertz.
Yes, exactly. And by altering the file this aggressively, West produced an enhanced version that he claimed captured a physical struggle. He even provided subtitles suggesting distinct voices, saying phrases like, "I think she's dying," and a response of, "Do it anyhow."
And the introduction of subtitles alongside heavily filtered audio is a masterclass in psychological priming. It fundamentally alters the way the brain processes auditory information.
I really want to examine the neuroscience behind this, specifically the concept of auditory pareidolia. I understand that visual pareidolia involves seeing faces in clouds, relying on the brain's visual cortex to map random shapes onto familiar patterns.
Right.
But auditory pareidolia seems to function as an aggressive autocomplete feature for our hearing, particularly when influenced by top-down processing.
Your assessment of top-down processing is entirely accurate. Auditory pareidolia occurs when the brain attempts to extract linguistic meaning from ambiguous or degraded audio signals.
It's trying to make sense of the noise.
Exactly. The human auditory system, particularly Wernicke's area, which handles language comprehension, is constantly scanning incoming noise for recognizable phones.
So when an analyst places the text, "do it anyhow," on the screen, they're essentially handing the listener's brain a phonetic blueprint.
Precisely. The visual input of the subtitle primes the auditory cortex. When the listener hears the static, their brain actively searches the chaotic frequencies for the specific vowels and consonants matching the text on the screen.
That is wild.
Because white noise and static contain a massive spectrum of random frequencies, the brain successfully isolates the fragments that fit the blueprint and just discards the rest. The listener genuinely experiences the sensation of hearing the words, even if those specific linguistic sounds were never actually uttered.
It functions as a digital Rorschach test. The internet was traumatized by the brutal nature of the crime, and they desperately wanted the audio to provide a roadmap to the killers. So they collectively willed the confession into existence out of the static.
And the power of that collective illusion was so strong that it largely dismissed the objective timeline established by law enforcement.
Right, because police repeatedly stated that at 1:23 a.m., the timestamp of the recording, Faith and Karina were demonstrably still at the Thrill nightclub.
Therefore, the audio logically could not capture an assault in the apartment. It was merely the distorted ambient noise of a crowded venue captured through denim or canvas.
But if the police say the timeline proves it's just club noise, why did the internet refuse to let it go? Are we just hearing what we want to hear?
In many ways, yes. Once a narrative takes hold, confirmation bias makes it very difficult to accept mundane explanations, especially when the alternative feels like uncovering a secret truth.
That clash between the factual timeline and the internet's enhanced audio narrative created a really volatile ecosystem of speculation. Every element of the crime scene was subjected to intense, often contradictory online analysis.
And the note on the fast food bag was debated endlessly.
Endless threads on Reddit. If the inner circle committed the crime, the note was a genuine, albeit reckless expression of rage. But if a stranger committed the crime, the note was hypothesized to be an incredibly sophisticated piece of misdirection designed to frame the roommate.
The 2021 arrest of Salguero Olivares abruptly dismantled the foundational assumptions of both of those theories.
It broke the internet.
His DNA was the empirical reality that the internet's narrative scaffolding just could not support. It provided the who with scientific certainty, but it completely failed to explain the why or the how.
And the introduction of Salguero Olivares into the narrative does not neatly resolve the anomalies. It simply shifts the perimeter of the mystery.
Arbitrary.
The ongoing legal proceedings clearly illustrate this tension. As we look at the state of the case right now in May 2026, Salguero Olivares remains incarcerated, awaiting trial amid significant delays.
And the defense strategy is fascinating here. They are not attempting to dismantle the DNA match directly. Rather, they are weaponizing the chaotic elements of the crime scene that the internet obsessed over for a decade.
The defense is systematically resurrecting the ghosts of the initial investigation to establish reasonable doubt. Their motions filed in August 2025 focus heavily on forensic artifacts that conflict with a lone, unknown intruder theory.
Like the bloodstain.
Yes. A major focal point of those 2025 motions is the request for independent tertiary testing of a 2-inch bloodstain located on the bathroom doorframe within the apartment.
And the biological composition and physical pattern of this stain are paramount because the defense asserts it contains a latent palm print.
Now, what is the distinction between a fingerprint and a palm print in this kind of analysis?
Well, the distinction is significant. While both rely on the unique patterns of friction ridges on the epidermis, palm prints cover a much larger surface area, and they're often deposited during dynamic movements.
Like bracing against a doorframe during a struggle.
Exactly. But recovering a clear, readable print from a fluid medium like blood on a textured surface requires highly specialized enhancement techniques.
The defense is suggesting that the friction ridge details within that bloodstain do not match their client. Furthermore, they are strategically pointing back toward the inner circle.
Yes, they are reviving early police reports that documented the roommate having a bloody finger on the morning the body was discovered.
By drawing attention to this, They are forcing the court to reckon with the very same circumstantial suspicions that fueled the internet sleuths in 2013.
Which creates a really fascinating strategic duel in the courtroom. The prosecution relies on the gold standard of modern forensics, the DNA profile match from CODIS. That biological material unequivocally places the defendant in the immediate vicinity of the crime.
Right.
However, the defense utilizes the chaotic periphery of the scene, the unexplained palm print, the syntax of the 3:40 a.m. text, and the sheer irrationality of the handwritten note to construct an alternative narrative.
It's like having pieces from two entirely different jigsaw puzzles in the same box. We have the who with a DNA match, but the why and the how look like pieces from a completely different picture. It requires the jury to weigh two entirely different types of truth.
On one side, you have molecular biology. On the other side, you have the behavioral psychology of the crime scene.
Years ago, the FBI generated a criminal profile for this exact case, and they concluded that the perpetrator likely knew the victim. They based this on the localized nature of the blunt force trauma and the intensely personal grievance expressed on the fast food bag.
And now the prosecution bears the immense burden of reconciling that FBI behavioral analysis with the random reality of the DNA match.
It's a huge hurdle.
They must present a logical sequence of events explaining how an opportunistic intruder, acting on the vulnerability of an unlocked door, somehow generated a crime scene that mimicked a deeply intimate, rage-driven assassination.
Did the intruder arrive, find a previously written note concerning a roommate dispute, and just leave it on the bed to confuse investigators?
Or did the perpetrator, possessing no prior connection to Faith whatsoever, write a note about jealousy simply to manufacture a false motive?
Both of those scenarios require a level of calculated staging that heavily contradicts the impulsive use of an empty rum bottle as a weapon.
Those contradictions really highlight the evolutionary arc of forensic science over the past 15 years. I mean, the investigation utilized advanced techniques like Parabon snapshot when traditional databases failed, yet the ultimate identification relied on the mundane friction of a DUI traffic stop.
It emphasizes that while technology can identify the source of biological material, it cannot reconstruct the behavioral sequence that deposited it.
The science tells us who left the cells, not what they were thinking when they did it.
And the failure of evidence to provide a cohesive narrative is precisely why Faith's story continues to grip the public consciousness. We touched on this earlier, but the psychological implications are profound.
The human mind requires order.
It does. A narrative involving jealousy, betrayal, and a scorned inner circle offers a recognizable sequence of cause and effect. It is tragic, but it is comprehensible.
It acts as a narrative shield. If the violence is a consequence of a toxic social dynamic, individuals can subconsciously protect themselves by just managing their own social circles.
But the realities suggested by the DNA match a random individual walking through an unlocked door in a communal hallway shatters that shield entirely.
It's terrifying.
It forces the public to acknowledge that the environments they perceive as safe, like the transitional fortress of a college apartment, are highly vulnerable. The internet obsessed over the note and the voicemail because accepting the random nature of the intrusion was fundamentally too terrifying.
The physical evidence in this case functions less like a map leading to a singular destination and more like a prism that refracts the event into dozens of conflicting theories.
The biological certainty of the DNA match answers the paramount question of presence, but it simultaneously deepens the mystery surrounding the artifacts left behind.
Even if a conviction is ultimately secured in the upcoming trial, the secondary questions may remain permanently unresolved.
The scientific record will reflect whose DNA was present, but the historical record may never definitively identify who composed the lure text at 3:40 a.m. or who physically picked up a pen and scrawled a message of jealousy on a takeout bag amid such profound violence.
The forensic truth is a matter of molecular matching. The narrative truth is something else entirely. It really forces us to accept that the closure provided by the judicial system is often just an administrative conclusion rather than a comprehensive explanation of human behavior.
And as we move into an era where artificial intelligence and deepfake technology are becoming ubiquitous, the concept of auditory pareidolia we discussed earlier is only going to become more complex for you, the listener, to navigate.
Oh, absolutely.
If the public and future juries can be subconsciously primed to hear a murder confession in a wall of static from 2012, imagine the cognitive friction of interpreting highly manipulated synthetic audio in the trials of tomorrow. The fog of conflicting evidence isn't clearing, it's just changing composition. Next time, we examine the Austin yogurt shop murders, a case involving 4 girls, one night, and a tragedy that changed an entire city.